listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I am Bob Schlageber.
And my name is Jamal Thomas. Let's get ready to go against the grain. Today we'll be discussing the craptacular crap show that was last night's South Carolina Democratic debate. Now, I predicted there would be fireworks, but as human cockfights go, it was roundly understood to be painful and degrading to anyone that watched. I took one for the team. Bob was doing something far more compelling. Anything short of watching Lint roll across the floor would have been more compelling. I'm going to go with Bob for some questions later on to check out his ability to predict desperate behavior of politicians. Let's get a little bit of humor out of that. Later, we'll be discussing the latest with the coronavirus, its potential effect on the United States, as well as the 1,000-point drop in the stock market with John Ross, senior fellow at the Troy Institute at Renmin University of China. Later in the show, we'll be discussing the Assange extradition trial with Sputnik correspondent Walter Smolarek. And later in the evening, we'll have a conversation on Sanders, and not just Sanders, but the questions that were asked in the debate dealing with foreign policy. But first, it is impossible. It is utterly and entirely impossible to not start here. Last night's Democratic Party debate. That debate was roundly understood to be painful. I watched that debate perched in my room. Initially, I tried to run it for the channel, and after I was shut down by YouTube, I just watched alone in silence, tweeting bad things on Twitter. I apologize to anyone that came across on Twitter or watching that debate. It was painful. It was utterly painful. We knew that there were going to be fireworks. We knew that they were going to go after Sanders. He was going to be the front person, and all incentives in the world. Look, behavior conforms to environment. In this very specific case, we have a very specific objective, and we have very specific things that these campaigns think they need to do. One guy, Sanders, has just taken the black vote. He's just taken the Hispanic vote by double digits. He's taken the white vote. He's taken the white working class vote. He's just won the first 3 states. He has the potential to win South Carolina, a state that Joe Biden considered to be a firewall. If Sanders takes South Carolina, he is going to run through with a ball of steam like a flaming star in the blackness of space alone, just flying, ball of light. They must stop him now, meaning the only opportunity they're going to get to stop him to hold back what they consider to be the existential threat to the party, and what I would argue is the thing that will actually save the party. They got to stop him now. So what do? Of course, they're going to put out all the stops. Everybody's going to try to showboat. Everybody's going to try to get their soundbite, their moment in the sunlight. And again, with the option of stopping Sanders. When this entire process starts, meaning they start the debate, they go in attacking Sanders right off the bat. Sanders gets the first question, and he responds. In the last 3 years, the last 3 billionaires in this country saw $850 billion increase in their wealth. But you know what? For the ordinary American, things are not so good. Last year, real wages increases for the average worker were less than 1%. Half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. 87 million Americans have no health insurance or underinsured. 45 million people are struggling with student debt. 500,000 people died tonight, are sleeping on the streets, including 30,000 veterans. That is not an economy that is working for the American people. That is the economy that's working for the 1%. We're going to create economy for all, not just wealthy campaign contributors. Straightforward, to the point. First question, this is what I'm here for, the American population. The American population. Now, that has been a winning message. And by the way, that message won this particular debate because regardless of how bad and craptacular of a show it was, Sanders was able to, at the very least, come out looking better than everyone else. CBS's News own poll came out with Sanders, 45% of who impressed you the most in this debate, followed closely by Biden, 43%. I suppose that was a low bar. Biden was up, and talking. He wasn't drooling, and he didn't have any kind of bloodshot eye or anything. So I suppose he gets props on that. But you must understand the debate was so craven that just the very act of just trying to stay above it all in and of itself was a big chore. They needed to score points. And based on the polling, and honestly, based on my just looking at the debate, they did not do that, despite all the attacks that they were putting forth. When they asked the second question, who do you think made the best case for Trump again? Sanders wins that. Meaning what they needed to accomplish, all of them, was not accomplished in this debate. So let's proceed from there. This is not me wishful thinking. This is me just kind of making an objective argument based on information. Sanders makes his case. Now, what does everyone else say after Sanders makes that case? He is there clearly for the middle class. I'm there for the poor. This country needs to work for more than just the top 1%. Warren or Bloomberg invoked the Russians, saying that Vladimir Putin wants Donald Trump to run against Bernie Sanders because he believes that Trump would win. That was literally the very first attack piece. Warren says she's a better president than Bernie because she gets stuff done. And then she bitterly castigates Sanders, saying his supporters attacked her health care plan when she put it out, that non-Medicare, Medicare for all plan. Pete gave a random, non-memorable soundbite. I have no idea what Pete said. Biden attacked him on the Brady bill and potentially primarying Obama. Tom Steyer argued that Bernie was right. He still has that bromance, but that he effectively went too far. Effectively, Tom Steyer was arguing radical centrism. And after all of these attacks that didn't touch the main basic point that Sanders was making about its economy, working for the top 1%, listen to what Sanders says after all of these attacks going on him.
You know, Pete mentioned, I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight. I wonder why. And maybe, you know, Pete mentions what the American people want. I will tell you, Pete, what the American people want, and Joe, what the American people want. They don't want candidates to be running to billionaires for huge amounts of funding.
All right, let's clear this up once and for all.
Pete has gotten funding
you got people
from
believing
over
something
50
that is false.
billionaires.
This
Joe,
needs
I
to be
think, has
cleared
gotten
up.
a little bit more. What the
All right.
American people want, by the way, and a lot of the issues we'll be discussing tonight are issues I raised 4 years ago. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour, making public colleges and universities tuition free, and finally doing what every other major country on earth does, guaranteeing health care to all people as a human right through a Medicare for all single-payer system.
I can't allow.
He brings it back to the point. That's what he does. After all of their attacks on ancillary issues that is not necessarily dealing with the actual issue that is addressed, that is facing us, meaning income inequality and this notion of a class or a system that works for the interests of one small segment of that system as opposed to the entirety of everyone else. Sanders is making the very basic point, bringing it back to the very basic point. He's not getting off of the point. This entire debate was the exact same way. A question was asked to Sanders about what do people get wrong about him, and listen to the way he answers. Again, maintaining this particular point of, I am here to fight for the middle class. I am here to fight for you. Listen to the clip.
Misconception, and you're hearing it here tonight, is that the ideas I'm talking about are radical. They're not. In one form or another, they exist in countries all over the world. Healthcare is a human right. We have the necessity, the moral imperative to address the existential threat of climate change. Other countries are doing that. We don't need more people in jail, disproportionately African American, than any other country on earth. Not a radical idea. The motto, the saying that moves me the most is from Nelson Mandela. And Mandela said, everything is impossible until it happens. And that means if we have the guts to stand up to powerful special interest, we're doing phenomenally well. If we can bring working people together, black and white and Latino, we can create a nation.
All right, Senator.
Where all people have a good standard of living.
And he has. He has brought all of those groups together, blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, without alienating each other. Meaning he has been able to bring together a large coalition of people who realize they are being screwed. He is pushing hard on this particular point. Healthcare, education, expanding Social Security, and all of the other Democrats are fighting that very basic point, meaning this is the guy who effectively they keep saying is not a Democrat, but he is pushing for ideals that were almost the philosophical vanguard within the Democratic Party, especially the FDR. FDR will be rolling over in his grave. And honestly, everything that we saw last night was the worst of the Democratic Party. And the reason why Sanders, to some degree, is the cure for that party, despite them not wanting to take their medicine. Look at the number of people who were there, by the way. You had Bloomberg owning up to the fact that he bought various members of the party. You had another situation where people were booing Sanders, talking about progressive policies, but cheering a billionaire. Now, why is that the case? That's the case because the Democratic Party had seats. In order to get a seat, you had to be a sponsor. The seat tickets range from $1,750 to $3,200. Essentially, people of means and creatures of the party were the people who ended up getting the seats, which means that the Democratic Party, a party that is supposed to be philosophically bound to support the interests of the poor, the workers in this particular country, is out there cheering a billionaire. Think about that, the oligarch taking over the party. FDR is spinning in his grave. It's a very basic point that Sanders is making that needs to be understood, that is never necessarily directly dealt with. Think of all the productive capacities that take place with you and the other people like you in the context of your society. All of the labor, all of the work, all of the services that take place, the cooks, the cleaners, all of the people who clean the streets, who serve you your groceries, who fixes your coffee, all of those people, all of that labor, and all of that gets siphoned away to the top 1%, meaning all of the resources of that labor gets ferreted off to the top 1%. Do you realize that Jeff Bezos, regardless of whatever idea Jeff Bezos comes up with, it is impossible for Jeff Bezos to actualize that particular idea all by himself? There will always be labor. There will always be a need for individuals in that process. And yet, in our society, in our country, we have this weird system where we look at this process that absolutely requires labor, meaning Bezos, Bloomberg, any of these people, regardless of how good their idea is, they cannot do it by themselves. And despite requiring workers for them to be billionaires, you still have a process where they walk away with billions of dollars, and you have other people who are fighting just to make $15 an hour. And then to boot with Amazon, they don't even pay any federal taxes. I guess I'm making this basic point that Sanders and the argument that he is making is getting across almost as a focal point, an avatar of absolute rage and anger of the people in the context of the society that realizes they are being screwed over. Their bills are skyrocketing. Their expenses are skyrocketing. At the same token, their wages aren't going anywhere, but productivity is going through the roof. That is going somewhere. This is not an act of God. This is an act of policy. Sanders is articulating that better than anybody else in this race. And all of them, at this point, are trying to catch up. The key here is Sanders is the one that actually has this movement. Sanders is the one that actually can galvanize this particular group and has been showing strength with independents and has been showing strength as beating Trump in poll after poll after poll, even when the other candidates have not been able to do so. I guess they're making the very basic point that the Democratic Party is pushing back against the person that most represents the ideals of what people consider to be the Democratic Party, and that is endemic or emblematic of the problem with that party. Bob, you didn't get a chance to see this debate, but we're going to get a chance to ask you questions about this particular debate. How do you think your prognostication skills are going to be on craven politicians trying to score points?
Well, I guess a few things. The Democratic Party is not the party that people think it is, what it will be, what it hopes to be, any of that stuff. The party's long gone, and it showed in that room last night of having to buy seats of thousands of dollars to be in that room. And
cheering
then you see
a billionaire.
Yeah, and cheering on a billionaire, and he's been cheered on along the way. My mayor, I guess I live here in Washington, D.C. I'm a registered voter. Muriel Bowser has endorsed Michael Bloomberg, a billionaire, and it's shown in her policies, and it trickles down. And this is what I'm really kind of fascinated by. I think of a friend of mine, but I'll call him out here. The president of the D.C. Young Democrats has talked a lot about the importance of running a campaign now that he runs for council at large here on public safety.
Yeah.
And the other night, there was a conflict of timing. He could either go to a local governance meeting with their advisory neighborhood commissions, or he could come to an organizing meeting that was taking place on public safety issues. So where did he go? Did he go to the organizers and activists working in the streets, or did he go to the meeting with the other government politicos and try to pitch himself as the person he should get elected?
Yeah,
Obviously, you know where he
yeah.
went. They're not organizing. These people are doing fundraising. They're doing big meetings with Get Me Elected. They're doing soirees with black ties. They're doing fancy debate. I mean, it was a show last night. It's theatrics.
Yeah.
Those people in the room put on suits and ties and bow ties and dressed up for the show because it's all show for them. And then you see somebody like Congressmember Jim Clyburn, who is the highest-ranking black member of Congress. He's the majority whip in Congress, coming out today and endorsing Joe Biden in South Carolina ahead of the primary there on Saturday. Jim Clyburn gets something out of it. If Joe Biden becomes president somehow, he gets something.
Yeah.
The everyday black voter in South Carolina, they don't get anything if Joe Biden is the president. That's what shows it's so out of step that these people, the Muriel Bowsers of the world, the Jim Clyburns of the world, they're thinking about what they can get endorsing these presidential candidates like Biden and Bloomberg to the masses saying, oh, they'll help you. They know that's not going to help anybody else besides themselves. That's what's so disgusting to see. Let's take a quick break and let's get back and you tell me more about this debate that I almost want to watch it now because it was so boring.
It was
and so awful.
It wasn't boring. It was just painful.
Painful. And there's something attractive to pain.
Sometimes.
So I was like, want to
depends
watch
on
it.
who's is being
But
distributed
I'm going
to.
to take your word not to watch it. But let's play some clips so you can tell me a little bit more about what happened. You're listening to Political Misfits live here in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show, and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world. From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea.
From Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and, of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And, of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my fortunate co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Fortunate because Bob didn't have the chance to, or didn't need to watch that craptacular crap show that was the Democratic debate in South Carolina. If you'd like to call in to discuss the debate and anything else, feel free to call at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. So, Bob, I was watching the show. All of us were texting each other last night. And I think we were both like, oh, God, this is painful. This is so degrading. I think Crystal Ball tweeted out something like, no one won in this debate, only people who didn't watch the debate.
That's what happened. Yeah, I was at a class, and so I was checking my phone here and there just to see if anything crazy was happening or exciting. And you and our producer, Michelle, were saying that it was painful to watch. And I get out of the class, and that I see Crystal Ball tweeted out, the only people that won this debate tonight were those who hadn't watched it.
Pretty much.
And I said, hey, I'm winning right now. Why would I go home and watch this thing?
It puts you in the mind of WrestleMania, at least to me. That's the way I experienced it, where Hulk Hogan would get beat up, and it's like they're like 4 or 5 goons hitting him, and you know it's like, God, man, he's just a man, and all of these people hitting him. Well, the difference is Sanders came out of this looking pretty well. I mean, basically, he stuck to the main point.
Okay.
I'm here to fight for the working class.
Good strategy.
So, right. So everybody else, not so much. So, all right. So softball. What did Mike Bloomberg say about the Democrats elected in 2018? A, I supported them. B, I coordinated with them. C, I bought them.
Well, yeah, I think we've already leaned into the he bought them. So here now telling me what Michael Bloomberg said. Yeah, he said he bought them. He hosted them. They all owe him. How dare any of them endorse anybody but me? And if we don't win this thing, we need to leave the party immediately. That's what he said. I bought them all.
All right, let's hear the clip.
Please.
Let's just go on the record. They talked about 40 Democrats. 21 of those were people that I spent $100 million to help elect. All of the new Democrats that came in, put Nancy Pelosi in charge, and gave the Congress the ability to control this president. I got the.
I like Pete's little laugh in the background. That's fascinating. When you're a billionaire, you can just buy people. That's pretty cool. Maybe I'll be a billionaire one day. That's what Pete was thinking. Maybe I'll be a billionaire. This guy's pretty cool. He just buys people. I can just buy people? That's great.
Freudian slip. I just bought them. I mean, Bloomberg spent billions into the political
Let's just get
space
this
over
on
the last few
record. This
years.
stuff's on record, first of all. You can see who donates to people in most situations, unless it's all dark money and that he's like pushing via PACs, which I'm sure he's doing as well.
I bought them.
I bought them.
All right, so we have another one. Another debate highlight. What country leader did Joe Biden call a thug and threaten to invade? This was utterly astonishing in the way it was framed. A, China.
Okay.
B, Cuba. C, Venezuela.
My initial thought before my options was Venezuela. So I'm going to go with Venezuela. That's where he went with Nicolas Maduro.
Let's hear the clip.
And here's the deal. I would be on the phone with China and making it clear. We are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on. We have to be there with you and insist on it and insist.
I like that we have to be in your country. Well, our debt is in your country already. So we are clearly already in your country, my dude.
I'm just always enamored by the way America can attack other leaders like relentlessly slander and smear the leaders of the other countries. That used to be like a fig leaf of congeniality when talking about other leaders. He's like, this is literally the #2 superpower if you're talking about from the standpoint of like economics. We have a relationship with them that is tethered, like inextricably linked, and we're calling the guy a thug, and that this is astonishing stuff. Can you imagine somebody saying, the president of the United States is a thug, and we're going to get in the United States face?
I didn't have a chance to watch the debate last night, as I mentioned, and so we're talking a little bit about the different clips. So there was a presidential debate. Did Joe Biden do a senatorial debate as well, since he's running for Senate at the same time, apparently, after he said, I'm running for Senate the other day? Or was he on stage with the presidential candidates?
Well,
they cleared things up. He is running for president.
He is running for president.
Sorry, just want to make sure.
So here's one more. So maybe this one will get you. But the last one stumped you. So
that one
you're
stumped
1 for
me.
1.
Did nobody bring up Nicolas Maduro? Is he done? We're done with that conversation now?
I think we are, at least for the time being. Mayor Pete used the question about Idlib, Syria to do what? A, attack Bernie Sanders on Russiagate. B, attack Bernie Sanders on healthcare. C, attack Bernie Sanders for supporting dictators.
I guess it sounds like the dictator thing. That's where we're going. I'm surprised there's not like a section D on him talking about how important it was he served in the military. Did he not slide in, I'm a veteran?
He always slides that in. That's
I'm a veteran.
Part of it.
Yeah, I'm going to go with C as my answer, is he attacks Bernie Sanders on supporting dictators.
Clip.
And this is one of the reasons we have got to change the balance of power in the region, because the president has basically vanished from the stage when it comes to even playing a role in the future there. Turkey, Russia, Iran all have so much more of a say than we do. We don't have to be invading countries to be making a difference, working with our international partners in order to deliver peace and support those who are standing up for self-determination. Now, I want to come back to something, and I promise it relates to international affairs, because Senator Sanders asked me a question earlier. He asked the question of whether health care for everybody is a radical idea. And it's not, which is why I'm for it. Very much in a different way, though. What is a radical idea is completely eliminating all private insurance. And part of how you know it is that no industrialized country has gone that far.
He is so loathsome.
He went with healthcare.
He is so loathsome. There's a clip on here. One of the questions I wanted to ask was like, all right, Bob, who do you believe is smug enough to just, with a rhetorical question, just starts talking for 30 to 40 seconds over top of the other person that is currently
That's what it was last night, just people over talking.
Yeah, but Buttigieg was that much more egregious. Sanders was answering a question, and he says, well, tell me, Pete. Now, he's doing this entirely rhetorical, and Pete just goes, well, if you're asking me, well, I'm going to say, but, I mean, I think that Bernie Sanders, I mean, you're asking me the question, I'm going to respond to the question. And he does that for 40 seconds.
And what is
the
your
moderators just got to be back there chilling?
The United States, and this again, it's always where I'm like, I feel
So
crazy.
bizarre.
I feel crazy pushing back on this stuff because the stuff's like it's weird when stuff's are facts, and I know we do a news talk analysis, and so a lot of it's opinions. But when the United States has 800 military bases around the world and some 60 to 70,000 troops in the Middle East, how are you, Pete Buttigieg, talking about how we don't need to invade other countries to have power? We're already there, my dude. You're already there. You're already in those situations. So there's like nothing else that needs to be done. If you just maintain the status quo, all of the things that the U.S. military is breaking around the world will continue. Doesn't matter if Donald Trump is the president, who's the president, if we maintain those bases and troops in those regions, even a status quo and doing it well.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff with Pete Buttigieg, the thing that drives me, he constantly goes back, I served in the military. And let me tell you one thing. When I was in the military, you learn how all Americans are Americans.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not
nonsense.
true. You're like a white dude in the military. People are cool with you. And you come back home and like, we live in 2020, the long way to go as a society around gay equality, but we've made great strides.
Yes.
Racial equality, not quite there yet. Trans equality, not quite there yet. For white gay men who live in liberal college towns, like you're doing okay. And for him to use his, I served in the military, so I know at the heart of all Americans, they're good, strong people, and America just could do wars better. And if we could just have better authorization of the wars with 3-year sunsets that allow us to walk graciously away from things after we blow people up. I'm Pete Buttigieg. Healthcare. What? Like, what was the pivot? That doesn't make any sense.
Because he was trying to go after Sanders on the healthcare thing. He's so fake. He's so fake. And it's like I watch them like there are people out there that actually believe Pete Buttigieg is being real. He's an actor. Like it's so aggravating. Like, look, my pet peeve when I watch this stuff, I just want somebody authentic. Like even if I don't like what you're telling me, at the very least, be authentic.
How was Tom Steyer last night?
Tom Steyer.
Was he authentic? He feels authentic. He
Tom
feels
Steyer
like just the guy up there just meandering around. It feels very real.
In this particular case, he ended up getting into fights with Biden over private prisons. Biden went after him full bore on private prisons. Steyer was pissed. He was like, "Oh, how dare you, sir!" Yeah. Like those pushes
I
back.
bought a website to impeach Donald Trump, and you're attacking me. How dare you?
It was a human cockfight. Everybody was going after everyone else, and that's what I mean when I say they needed to have a big out there moment. And so all incentives in the world was pushing them to do that. The problem is that you ended up with this situation where Sanders just stuck to script. I'm not, like, he defended certain things like the Cuba thing, which was like, yes. The Palestinian thing, yes. You have lefties who was like, yes, like cheering this, but never hearing this stuff before. And even this honesty about America's foreign policy. We have the clip. We'll talk about that later on. But it's just really, really, it was a fascinating debate in that sense, but they didn't accomplish what they needed.
Where was the Warren attacks on Bloomberg? Was it not a strategy that seemed to get her much more than money from the last time?
Yeah. So the first time around when she attacked Bloomberg, it seemed to get a lot of bang for the buck. Like it was just viral. Like, oh my God, he's damaged and wounded. She tried to do that this time around. She asked him a question, basically saying that the killer baby. It was that type of thing in the debate. People were like, whoa, she said I'm a killer baby, boo! And the crowd who needed to be sponsored, essentially wealthy sponsors. We don't even know if Bloomberg sponsored these people to be there, so we don't know what that crowd. But they have to be wealthy to be sitting there. Booed her when she brought up this notion of Bloomberg harassing a woman, telling a woman to kill her pregnant baby. But she goes back and forth with that, and it didn't seem like the energy was there for it, even though Warren was kind of pushing on it. There's a great clip with Chris Matthews, where Chris Matthews is like, "You really believe he said that?" And Warren is like, "Yeah." "Why do you believe he said that?" Warren is like, "I believe the woman." "Why do you believe the woman? Are you really certain you believe the woman? You believe he's that type of guy?" And like Chris Matthews asking her like 10 times over and over and over again.
Did Bloomberg seemingly prepare better for this debate this time?
Just modestly so. I mean, he's just onerous as a person. I mean, like, and I mean that from the standpoint of anybody on the left, just looking at him in that debate, spending $500 million with the notion of using that money to attack the person who's the most popular in that debate, but also just being on that stage, knowing he just bought his way on that stage. You also have this weird effect of Bloomberg. Look, how he talks, but also what he says does not necessarily work all that well on that stage. And he tries all sorts of jokes. They fell flat. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, to see the dichotomy between, like, a rich person on stage and then a lot of wealth in the audience as well, where they're, like, for him, but they're also kind of like, you're not that funny guy, like, at the same time pushing back, which is quite interesting. Jamar, let's go to another break. We're going to be talking about the coronavirus, COVID-19, when we get back, and its relationship with the Dow Jones and global stock markets and the economy. We'll be joined by John Ross for that discussion. Give us a call at 202-521-1320. If you have anything to say about the debate last night, COVID-19, and after that conversation, we'll talk about the latest from the case of Julian Assange in London. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We'll be back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I am Bob Schlaver. I'm here with Jamarl Thomas. We've been talking about the Democratic debate last night and some of the head scratchers it gave us. If you got any thoughts on the candidates' performances or on our next conversation as we talk about COVID-19, known as the coronavirus and its relationship with the economy, give us a call at 202-521-1320. Turning to the economy now, in the U.S. stock market, which has been swinging pretty wildly here the last few days. It had its worst two performances in a couple of years on Monday and Tuesday, when at its lowest point, the Dow Jones had dropped nearly 930 points, or 3.3%. I think that was like $1.7 trillion was wiped out there. Market Watch noted that the indicator ended on Tuesday down nearly 880 points to mark its sharpest ever two-session slide in points term, losing about 1,910 points, according to the Dow Jones market data. So we want to talk a little bit more about why the Dow Jones has dropped, and if, like most media accounts, is due to the coronavirus and the global supply chain being dramatically disrupted. Here to talk more about this is John Ross. John Ross is a senior fellow at Chongyang Institute at Renmin University of China and an award-winning resident columnist with several Chinese media organizations. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
John, as my question got there at the start here, are we seeing these big drops in the U.S. markets because of COVID-19, or is it being used as an excuse for why some of the markets have been overperforming or maybe overinflated, and this whole story about the coronavirus as the sole cause of these big drops here the last 2 days? Is that accurate, or are we missing a larger picture?
No, I think it is due to the coronavirus, but it's not due to the way that the media, such as the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, is reporting it. Basically, the threat is not to the global supply chains. That is due to the situation in China. The situation in China was very, very severe in January and the early part of February. But the number of cases of the coronavirus have fallen sharply in China. There was, outside of Hubei province, which is the center, there were only 5 yesterday. And the World Health Organization officially announced that the epidemic peaked on the 2nd of February. There's not going to be a big disruption from the supply chain from China. The big problem is that the situation is out of control outside China, that is in the West. I assume that's why Trump is holding his press conference about this matter, because in Italy, South Korea, the situation is the coronavirus is not under control, and this is going to spread. So therefore, it is due to the impact on the economy is due to the coronavirus, but it's not due to the situation in China. It's due to the out-of-control situation which is existing in the West. For about 2 months, we've had a hysterical total propaganda campaign against China, but China is the one country which is controlling the coronavirus. The big hit is going to be the effect of the coronavirus in the Western economies.
So tell us a little bit more about this. So it's quite interesting to me here that COVID-19, if you're keeping track of the numbers of cases that have been detected, 81,245 cases, 2,770 deaths. But then yet you take influenza, the main flu here in the United States, at least 14,000 people have died and 250,000 people have already been hospitalized during the 2019-2020 flu season, according to estimates from the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. More than 26 million Americans have already fallen ill with flu-like symptoms. The thing I don't understand is, isn't the economy understanding, does the economy not understand that there are going to be incidences like this where you have a health incident, or you have some type of labor manufacturing shortage, or you have a hurricane hit a big factory and then it's going to slow down manufacturing for that one industry or two industries? I'm kind of curious, just in general, how does the economy take into account these different types of health factors? And if you see the influenza here in the United States already being a big issue, why is COVID-19 causing such chaos?
It's because the death rate is much higher. If you take the situation, the average death rate at the present time, it's around 1%. That means it's already about 20 times as much as from influenza. If you take the situation today, which is exceptional because what is happening is that the medical services are overwhelmed, the death rate is 4%. So the number of people dying is much, much higher from COVID-19 than it is from influenza. Let's do a worst case scenario. I'm not suggesting this is what's going to happen, but let's take it, right? Okay. The worst estimates, as the COVID-19 is extremely infectious, around best estimates are from medical sources, 60% of the world's population could get it. If the death rate was 1%, that would mean 46 million people would die.
Wow.
Now, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen because I think measures will be taken against that. But the upside is far, far higher than from influenza because the number of people who die is very much greater than from influenza. It's not like SARS or Ebola. Ebola's got a death rate of 40%, and SARS had a death rate of 10%.
Let me actually, we have a caller in a moment, but what does this look like in Europe? I mean, Europe with the open border policy where you can effectively go from point A to point B in the various countries. Also, what does this look like in the United States if we're talking about, but let's say it doesn't hit 60%, let's say it hits 20%. I mean, that's still an extraordinary number. How does the U.S. deal with that, either from an economic standpoint or either just from a human standpoint?
What I would say from the situation in Europe, the situation is beginning to look scary. And this is happening during the last 2 to 3 days because previously you had 20, the number of cases in each country was measured in tens, which is not pleasant, but it's controllable. The new fact is that in Italy, the numbers are in hundreds. Now, the US is behind this because there are less people going back from Europe to the United States. But if it gets into the United States, if you had not merely 60%, if you had 20%, then you would have very, very large numbers of deaths. And therefore, I think if people are becoming worried about this, this is perfectly justified. The problem is that China is so far the only country which has been able to control the coronavirus, and you've had a lot of nonsense condemning China for so-called violations of human rights, when I think locking people down in the sense of not allowing them to go out. I would think that any sensible person in the world thinks the most important human right is to stay alive. So therefore, I think the situation in Europe, I would say we're close to a tipping point where people are becoming seriously scared. There are now, for example, large numbers of schools in Britain which are being closed down. It'll probably take maybe 2 to 3 weeks to hit the U.S., but then it will hit the U.S.
We have a caller here on the line. Devin, you're on the air with John Ross on Political Misfits.
Hi. I was just listening to this conversation, and everything is tied in together with the economy and everything because listening to the because I'm looking at all these facts with the DOWJ Jones, because I like to keep everything in tabs because everything is connected. So sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, so I'm going to be rambling a little bit.
Hey, Devin, don't be nervous, but what's the main point?
So, sorry, hold on, let me collect my thoughts. So, most of our economy is connected to China. So, when the coronavirus hit, it affected everything. So, the DOW Jones lost 2,000 points recently. I know you said 1,000 points. It was more 2,000 points.
Yeah.
Because when I kept track around January or around December, they were at 29,000 points. They are now at let me see.
Devin, no, I understand. It's 2,000 points. Let's bake that into it. What's the main point?
So when the coronavirus hit, sorry, I'm nervous.
That's
Okay,
all right, Devin. We're going to have
yeah.
you call back. Give us a call back,
give
and
us a
we'll
call
talk
back.
more about it. I did want to talk about how some of this stuff is interconnected with John Ross here. John, I'm interested in what I don't want you to have to guess at what Donald Trump's going to say tonight. He'll be addressing the nation around COVID-19 and the impact it's having on all sorts of different things. For me, it's overtaking what else is happening in the economy at the same time. You're seeing 10-year Treasury notes, 30-year Treasury notes hitting or getting close to all-time lows. We obviously know these huge tax breaks for billionaires and large corporations had no impact on economic inequality for the poorest in this society here. And so for me, in many ways, Donald Trump's going to say, oh, anything that happens bad in the economy, coronavirus, nothing else. Everything else, I'm doing great. Any other problems, it's this COVID-19 kind of thing without actually addressing all these other issues. So how does coronavirus compound with the other structural problems of the U.S. economy, and what is that going to lead to?
Well, the problem is that the U.S. economy is slowing down. If you take the economic projections in 2020, there was previously not going to be a recession, but the economy would slow down maybe to around 2%, which is not very high given China's economy, for example, is growing at more than 6%. The danger is that this is going to have a very depressive effect on the economy, particularly on consumption, because it's very simple. If people think they're going to die, they're not going to go out and spend. If you take the impact in China, for example, car sales are down 92% year on year. Right, that's not going to happen in the US, and I'm not suggesting that's right. But if there is a threat to health, it doesn't matter if you offer 5% off or you have a stimulus package, people are not going to go out. It's the same as, for example, the effect during the Iraq war in Europe. You had massive declines in travel and so on at that time. There was no point in having stimulus packages because people want the main priority of people to stay alive. So therefore, the threat which Trump is obviously trying to counteract is that the effect of the coronavirus could slow down the U.S. economy much more than would happen from the point of the general business cycle. And that's very bad news for him in the election. So I assume what he's going to do, he's going to try to talk up the stock market, try to talk up the economy, which is understanding the slowdown in the economy is very negative from the point of view of his prospects of being re-elected.
Let me ask you this, and we have about 30 seconds to a minute. Donald Trump, before the coronavirus hit, was attacking the Fed chair, essentially Powell, wanting him to lower rates. Now, an economy that's doing awesome, a president doesn't necessarily attack the Fed chair to lower rates if the economy is doing well, correct? Meaning this wasn't doing all that great before the coronavirus hits. Meaning, so this notion that Trump is going to put all of this on the coronavirus, it's like, I don't necessarily think it's altogether there. Can you speak to that?
Yes, sure, that's the case. I mean, the peak growth under Trump is slower than any American president since World War II. All his talk about the U.S. economy doing very well is a whole load of nonsense, right? But people don't judge by what is your rationalization. They judge by what is the economic circumstances around him. Up until the moment, he was concerned that there was going to be a slowdown in the economy, not a big hit. With this, it could be a big hit on Trump. That's why I assume he's going to have his press conference, because he's nervous about the situation.
That was John Ross. John Ross is the senior fellow at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. You can follow him at Twitter at JohnRoss43. You're listening to Political Misfits. We're going to take a quick break before we're joined by Walter Smolarek, Sputnik News analyst, who is live in London covering the latest in the Julian Assange extradition hearing. You're listening to Political Misfits here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host Bob Schlehuber. We've been discussing the train wreck of a debate in South Carolina. Bob has been dazzling us with his ability to predict craven politicians and what they would do in a game space where all incentives are for them to have a breakout moment.
I thank you for saying I did better than I think I did. They threw me some curveballs there.
Yeah,
Pete Buttigieg.
Pete's starting off talking about military and then going to healthcare.
I don't know why I thought logically. I was thinking too logically. I was like, I should have said, what would be the dumbest, most craven, divisive thing that Pete Buttigieg could do, and then gone that angle.
Well, see, the thing is, however bad you think they are, they're probably worse. So, there's that. Look, all of them needed to stop Sanders. I don't necessarily think they did. Based on CBS' own poll, they didn't necessarily accomplish that. So there's that. We had a great conversation about the coronavirus and its intersection with economics. I mean, the stock market is falling like 2,000 points. So if you have anything to talk about, give us a call, 202-521-1320. The number is 202-521-1320. That's anything to talk about on the previous topics or whatever is on your mind. But right now, let's switch gears to the extradition case of political prisoner and journalist Julian Assange. Managing editor of Shadowproof, Kevin Gozzola, is reporting that the third day of the trial will focus on whether or not the allegations against Assange amount to political offenses under the U.S.-UK extradition treaty. Basically, if the charges amount to if it amounts to political offenses, they can't extradite. There's a treaty, an extradition treaty between the United States and the UK that say you can't extradite for political offenses. And they're arguing that the Espionage Act, by definition, deals with political offenses. In order to discuss, we're here with Walter Smolarek. Walter, how are you today?
Very good.
So did I explain that correctly? Basically, today they're trying to make the argument that basically trying to pull him for the Espionage Act is basically a political offense. And under the treaty between the U.S. and the U.K., you can't extradite someone for a political offense.
Yeah, so most of the time in court today was spent arguing this point. So, first it was Julian Assange's lawyer's turn. So they went through, actually centuries of examples of how it's, the most common practice when it comes to extradition treaties, going back to the 1800s or even the 1700s, when two countries, make these agreements to extradite people from their territory to the other, that there's a clause that says this does not apply to political cases. The prosecution's argument, the argument by the attorneys arguing on behalf of the United States government that Julian Assange should be extradited, made the case then that international law doesn't matter at all in the UK. That was sort of the core of their argument. They were saying that, well, look, in the UK, Parliament is sovereign. Parliament makes laws. And if Parliament wants to pass a law that reflects a treaty agreement between the government, between the UK government and another government, they can do that. But because the domestic UK extradition law, which was passed in 2003, has no clause, it doesn't make any mention of political cases, political offenses, then, you're actually not bound at all by this agreement with the United States. Now, shockingly, that apparently has a lot of precedent in the British legal system. I mean, that is actually kind of how it works. In the United States, for instance, the Constitution says that treaties are the highest law of the land, that they supersede laws passed by Congress. That is not the case in the UK. It's unbelievable. But technically speaking, any agreement that the UK makes with another government, unless that's subsequently passed into domestic law by Parliament, is actually just kind of like a suggestion that they're just sort of, honored by the honor system, bound to uphold.
So wait, you're saying that they're going to blow?
Also,
you're saying they're going to potentially blow off the treaty? So even if it does meet the level that the Espionage Act is a political offense, they are going to blow that off. Is that what you're? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, that was their whole argument, that it does not matter, that this is an irrelevant point.
Wow.
Because the 2003 extradition treaty, which is a law passed by Parliament, makes no such reference. It's really incredible. But like for instance, in 2004, there was a group of people who took the UK government to court over the invasion of Iraq, and they said that under the United Nations Charter, under the precedent of the Nuremberg trials, to wage a war of aggression is the highest international crime, right? And so that's what the British government did, and therefore we're taking you to court. And what the UK court said is that they refused to hear that. They rejected the argument because they said, oh well, in the UK, Parliament is sovereign, and Parliament never passed any laws against wars of aggression.
That's astonishing. That is utterly astonishing. Yesterday, what was the main defense? Really is. The defense went directly into the prosecution's case, though. I mean, meaning this is a secondary argument. The first argument was basically pushing back on this notion that Assange was just releasing this with hurting officers or hurting various people. Basically, that he was releasing it in this kind of unhinged way, that he wasn't necessarily cleaning out the names, that he wasn't being flagrant in the way that he was letting this information out.
Yeah, that's right. So the theme of the proceedings has changed since those first 2 days, which basically revolved around the question of, is Julian Assange a journalist or not? Or more particularly, is what Julian Assange did by releasing the information that was provided to him by Chelsea Manning, was that an act of journalism, or was it a simple criminal offense that led to people being harmed, or the implication killed, disappeared, in the words of the attorneys representing the United States? So now it's about, basically they're rebutting the principal argument by the defense attorneys, by Julian Assange's lawyers, that, this is a political offense, this is a political trial. Espionage is by definition, a political charge.
Yeah.
And so Julian Assange, who is a journalist, should not be extradited. And so now this is kind of round two, right, for the U.S. attorneys, and they're basically saying, we don't care, it doesn't matter.
That's astonishing. That is utterly astonishing. We don't care that this is a political charge, meaning even if you're right that it's indeed a political charge, we don't particularly care. We can blow past that. What's the media there? So how is the media covering this particular trial? I know outside it was pretty loud, and there were a lot of people that was showing up to protest. But what is the UK media discussing about this trial? I mean, I would imagine they have to be focused on it to some degree.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's really, there's a shocking lack of mainstream U.S. outlets attending the trial, covering intensely the trial. There's some there on the first day when it opened, but the interest apparently kind of faded. I was trying to think of why that might be. Why might the corporate media not want to do this? Because I thought it would be pretty easy for them to sort of spin this with some anti-Russia angle. They're trying to revive the Russiagate narrative now. This kind of gives them an opportunity, like, what's wrong with you guys? Why aren't you taking it? But because I think it's because the content of the trial is about not the 2016 election related stuff, but it's about U.S. war crimes, right?
Yeah.
It's about U.S. meddling all around the world, and the collateral murder video and stuff that the corporate media in the U.S. would like to just sort of forget about.
Did that come up in the trial? I mean, because when you think about it, we always have this tendency to look at look at the stuff with weird angles. I mean, a guy comes forward, gives a video showing that the United States murdered a reporter, Reuters agent. Effectively, the people who were in the plane didn't know who they were killing. Instead of dealing with the fact that they were killing people en masse without knowing who they were killing, they end up prosecuting the person who leaks the video. They prosecute the whistleblower. Like, for all of this talk about rah-rah and whistleblowers, the reality of it is whistleblowers do not have good lives. I mean, Chelsea Manning is being tortured in prison right now in order to turn evidence on Assange. I mean, this stuff is extraordinary. With everything, go ahead.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I mean, I just think that's an important point about Chelsea Manning. I mean, we shouldn't forget about her situation in all of this. And it's not an exaggeration to say, as you do rightly, that she's being tortured. I mean, that's what solitary confinement is.
It's put a human being in a cage. Does the information come up that's in the leaks, as opposed to just the fact that they were leaks themselves, if that makes sense? Like, does the war crimes come up in the case, in the trial?
Right. Not really. I think that's pretty unfortunate because at the very least the spotlight could have been used to draw further attention to the crucially important information that it uncovered. But it's really been focused on these more legalistic issues, like what constitutes a political offense, what's a pure political offense versus a relative political offense. Is the UK bound by the treaties that it signs? Things like that. There was, though, if you want to go into the incident with the cage, right? The bulletproof glass that Julian Assange was is being forced to sit behind. That also was a pretty dramatic thing, though, that happened in the courtroom today.
Well, they had him sitting behind a bulletproof glass. Explain.
Yeah. So he's been sitting there since the trial began. It's like a box is probably the best way to describe it. So he's it's part of the demonization, the degrading treatment that Julian Assange has been subjected to, that he's not permitted to sit with his lawyers, like a normal defendant. He's put in this completely separate section, totally walled off by bulletproof glass and, monitored by two guards at all time. Like he's, I don't know, like he's going to pull out a gun and start shooting people or something, or, like he's some like mafia boss. It's clearly designed to give the impression to the public that this man is, a dangerous criminal, a terrorist. And so it's also prevented Julian Assange, and Julian Assange actually got up, dramatically got up in the middle of the court session and started saying, like, look, I'm being denied the right to consult with my attorneys, in general, and also, confidentially, right? Because there are these two guards breathing down my neck at all times, anytime I have, any kind of basic interaction with them. Can I go sit with my attorneys, please? And the judge really exposed her bias. The judge in this case was so she wouldn't let when Julian Assange got up and started talking, she was like, no, you're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to talk. The only time, if you want to talk, you can, provide evidence, right? You can choose to testify, but I won't permit you to say anything. And she actually adjourned the paused the session for 5 or 10 minutes so that Julian Assange and his lawyers could go talk about how they want to proceed. They came back into the courtroom, and then Julian Assange's main defense lawyer said, we request that he be brought out from behind this demeaning box so that he can sit next to us and meaningfully participate in his own defense.
That was Walter Smolarek live in London. He'll be with us these next 2 days to give us the latest breaking news in the case of Julian Assange. If you're here in the United States and you want to get involved, you can see actionforassange.com to see the different protests that are taking place every day this week, starting at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tomorrow's protest will be outside of Capitol Hill in the Supreme Court at 12 p.m. That's actionforassange.com. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We'll take a break before we have a whole nother hour of news for you here in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlaber. I'm here with Jamarl Thomas. Get ready to go against the grain. Got another hour of going against the grain here, Jamarl. Pretty excited for it. Talking a lot about Julian Assange over the last hour, the role of AIPAC in the U.S. politics and election. We'll get to this hour and other conversations around Democratic foreign policy at last night's debates. Give us a call. Tweet us, 202-521-1320, or you can listen to us at Sputnik Misfits. We are joined now by David Swanson, who is an activist, journalist, radio host, and author of the book Curing Exceptionalism. David, thank you so much for joining us. We wanted to just start here and get your thoughts on Julian Assange and what is taking place in this extradition case here after we just heard live from Walter Smolarek there in London.
Well, I did not hear. Thanks for having me on. I did not hear what you just heard, and I'm not over there, but I have been opposed to the idea of indicting and extraditing him since before it happened. It's absolutely outrageous, and it's incredibly revealing and frightening the extent to which the U.S. media corporations don't see it as within their own interest to protect acts of journalism from prosecution. It's extremely disturbing.
You're somebody that's also followed the case of Chelsea Manning extensively, and anybody that's tried to speak out against the U.S. military, the war-making machine here, is silenced, tortured, and kept in a cage for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And Chelsea Manning's new act of bravery is quite possibly what could save Julian Assange from prison or worse.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I just wanted your brief thought there. I do want to switch here to the Democratic debate last night around foreign policy, and we talk about Chelsea Manning, somebody who was open and honest about what the U.S. government has been doing around the world. And I want to play a few of these different clips here and get some of your responses. This first one is Bernie Sanders calling out Americans, telling them it's about time for them to get honest about what the United States has been doing around the world. Let's play this first clip here.
Occasionally, it might be a good idea to be honest about American foreign policy. And that includes the fact that America has overthrown governments all over the world, in Chile, in Guatemala, in Iran. And when dictatorships, whether it is the Chinese or the Cubans, do something good, you acknowledge that. But you don't have trade love letters with them.
So that's my president right there.
Jamarl's excited.
As a lefty, that is an exciting prospect because it's just somebody being honest about our foreign policy around the globe.
And so that's, I think for a lot of people like yourself, they were really excited to hear this. For a lot of other people, there are people that sit to Bernie Sanders' left. I know it's like hard to imagine given what we're told about Bernie Sanders falling off the left. There are a lot of people here, David, that are still critical of Bernie Sanders' foreign policy. It's not an anti-imperialist lens. It's not an aggressively let's pull troops back. It's being honest. It's obviously to the left of all of the candidates that were on stage last night. But parse some of the critiques, and I guess I'm hoping you'll be honest with us. What are some of the critiques people still have towards Bernie Sanders' foreign policy that he still needs to address, or are going to be some of his blind spots moving forward?
Well, if you look at Bernie Sanders' domestic policies to the extent that you can distinguish them from militarism financially and otherwise, he would count as a moderate mainstream politician in a lot of European countries and other places around the world. He's absolutely right in that debate last night, and other times to say the big misconception is that I'm some sort of radical. But if you look at his foreign policy, it would count as a right-wing, imperialist, militarist policy in the extreme in almost any other country in Europe, among NATO allies of the United States, in Canada, in many countries around the world. It would count as extremely militarist. Now, he is far and away, even on foreign policy, which is his worst area, a dramatic improvement over the past 45 people to occupy the White House. There is no question. And people who have been badgering me for decades that I need to hold my nose and vote for the lesser evil, now they finally have a case, because now there's a guy who actually is significantly less evil than the other candidates on that stage or coming up in the general election. So I'm not opposing Bernie Sanders, but when you look at Bernie Sanders' actual positions and actual record, it's important to recognize that he's not been a principled opponent of militarism, that he has backed wars and opposed wars as the winds have blown, that he's backed weapons deals and weapons basing in Vermont as he's prioritized what he's falsely thought of as jobs programs over the problem of militarism. Their Politico sent out an email today just in absolute panic and horror because the weapons dealers were getting afraid that Bernie Sanders had made these vows to move hundreds of billions of dollars from the military to human and environmental needs, as I would put it, or domestic spending, as they put it. And my God, wouldn't he gain a lot of support if he were actually to make such vows? Sadly, he hasn't. This week, just before the debate, he put out a fact sheet. His campaign released a fact sheet saying how they would pay for how they would pay for education, how they would pay for Medicare for all, how they would pay for a Green New Deal, et cetera. And almost all of it they're looking at paying for with taxes on Wall Street speculation, taxes on wealth, taxes on income, extending Social Security by removing the cap on the payments into Social Security by the super wealthy, et cetera. Almost none of it from the military, except on the Green New Deal. If you look at the list of items that they're going to use to pay for the Green New Deal, one of them is moving this huge amount of money out of the military. But if you research enough and dig around on his website, you find out you have to divide by 15 because he's actually using numbers for over 15 years, doesn't tell you that. And it comes out to $81 billion, which some study found very, very conservatively was what the U.S. military spends so-called protecting the world's oil. And that's what Bernie wants to cut from the military, $81 billion a year out of $1.25 trillion across agencies, right? And so it's tiny unless there's more to it than that, unless he's not telling us. And so, of course, people like to imagine, well, he simply must be secretly planning to move hundreds of billions of dollars out of the military. Look, the weapons dealers are scared of it. He must be planning it. Well, you know, over the past 200 years or so, presidents have been worse than what they explicitly promised and campaigned on. They haven't been better. They haven't been secretly planning to be better than what they were openly promising. And if he's already being attacked for it, why not come out and do it and gain the support that would come with that? I would be. So
let's get Jamarl Thomas as a big Bernie Sanders fan here. I'm curious your initial response here, Jamarl, to what David's had to say.
Well, I mean, it's hard to know what Sanders' plan on it. I mean, I do agree with your analysis of it. I can't say you're wrong per se. I don't have any illusions about Sanders in regards to foreign policy. I don't necessarily think he's a perfect man. I just think he's a man that's better than everybody else that's there and that's better than every other Democrat for the past 50 years. Not to mention the shift in the argument that is being made in regards to dealing with Trump almost forces him into this kind of anti-war stance in order to out-left Trump on this particular issue. But again, this is kind of like the tallest little person. Him out-lefting Trump on this issue is still, like you say, to some degree, depending on the country you're in, more militaristic. But, you know, let's be fair. If you took any person, any leader from one of these countries in Europe, and you put them in the United States as the head of the United States, would they act really that much different? Meaning, isn't the environment to some degree shaping the individual that's in that office? And so I agree with you to some degree. He's probably going to be worse than what people think on this issue, but that worse I would accept as being much better than everybody else.
Well, I don't disagree with a bit of that. I think you're absolutely right. And I think even on the issues where he's the gold standard, it's going to take a massive public movement to tell him and the Congress and the bureaucracies in Washington to act on the promises. But we're going to be better mobilized with people in the streets and pressuring Congress and lobbying to move money out of the military and the wars into human and environmental needs if it's been part of the campaign, if it's been openly talked about and not just sort of fantasized by those of us who want it and feared by those who don't want it. So I think it would be, and it's incredibly popular, been incredibly popular in polling for decades to move money out of the military into human needs. It would not hurt Bernie with the public, and it could not make the corporate media bash him any more than they already do, because they're already all in on that. It can't get any worse. So I think it would be politically as well as morally and in terms of human survival beneficial for Bernie to come out and say, here's my federal budget proposal. Here's what we're not going to spend in the military.
But David, I have a question for you, though. If he takes money from the military and moves it to social programs, doesn't he show that he is a puppet of Vladimir Putin? Because that's what Putin wants, is our military to be destroyed. I say that facetiously, obviously, but it seems like Bernie Sanders is more than happy to give oxygen to the ongoing fight that Americans have with Russia and the ongoing Russiagate conspiracy, big media play here. Let's play a clip from last night about Bernie Sanders here talking about Russian interference and how he'll stand up to Mr. Putin and tell him no longer meddling in our relationships.
Let me tell Mr. Putin, okay, I'm not a good friend of President Xi of China. I think President Xi is an authoritarian leader. And let me tell Mr. Putin, who interfered in the 2016 election, try to bring Americans against Americans. Hey, Mr. Putin, if I'm president of the United States, trust me, you're not going to interfere in any more American elections.
Just why, Jamar? We've gone and talked to enough Americans now. I've been to enough different debates. I've been to enough places in this country, talked to enough people. They don't care about Russiagate. Nobody was watching impeachment after it had gotten going. The Russiagate stuff didn't work for the Democrats to take down Trump. It just ended up being a bunch of anonymous sources showing the flawed system of our judicial system, the FISA courts, domestic spying. All of it was this crazy thing that got us nowhere. And here is Washington Post running with anonymous sources, and Bernie Sanders, hook, line, and sinker, takes the bait and goes out there and pushes a conspiracy that only plays to people that aren't going to vote for him. Wealthy, Democratic, liberal people that are still angry about Hillary Clinton losing are not going to vote for you, Bernie Sanders. So why are you playing into this? Oh, 2016, they did this thing, and he has to now speak out on it.
Deployed once, and then within the course of, a day? I mean, they deployed once before the Iowa or the Nevada caucus, and then immediately implodes when sources come out for CNN coming out saying, look, this was bogus, this was overblown, et cetera, et cetera. The Democratic Party still came out screaming for sanctions for meddling that didn't take place. Like, this is utterly astonishing. Sanders, or at the very least Trump, comes out and makes a point of, yeah, that's bogus, that's fake news. Sanders should have handled it the same way. He started off making the point of, yeah, that's pretty convenient, and coming out of the Washington Post, and Jeff Bezos is the person. But he gave this all sorts of oxygen, an attack that will be used to undermine him every bit as much as it was used to undermine Trump.
Yeah, David, I'm sure that wasn't music to your ears when he went down that route last night.
Oh, absolutely disgusting. She had trouble getting through to me on the phone. That was clearly Vladimir Putin's fault. More evidence, namely none, than the evidence that Russia, impacted the 2016 U.S. election, which even the most extreme Russiagators are not even claiming. And this notion that somebody who may or may not have been Russia, released documents that we ought to be thanking them for, revealing to us what was happening in the rigged primaries 4 years ago, and bought some tiny number of ads on Facebook and Twitter. There's no we shouldn't just be saying that people aren't interested. We should be denouncing it as patently and obviously false.
Yes.
And for Bernie not to reply to accusations that Putin is helping him in 2020 with I'm mad about Putin helping Trump in 2016. No, he should deny it, reject it as patent nonsense. But xenophobia is so just built into the habits of U.S. politicians. When you push Bernie on, foreign countries, Venezuela or, anywhere else, he has this tendency to go to bashing foreigners because it's so easy. It comes without thinking. And the most incredible thing to me about the whole debate last night was the way these people talk about dictators and who with or talked with or said something less than negative about some particular dictator, when the overwhelming policy of the United States for decades has been to arm and train and fund most of the world's dictators who regularly, by the dozens, meet with every president in the White House, regardless of political party. The United States is arming and training and funding the militaries of Bahrain, Brunei, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Eswatini, Gabon, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Morocco, Oman, Qatar, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, South Sudan, Tajikistan, Thailand, Turkmenistan, Uganda, United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan, and others. And we're supposed to freak out because Bernie said something positive about Cuba.
So let me play that clip from last night. Here is CBS's correspondent here at the debate, basically challenging Bernie Sanders for having said something nice about Cuba. And this is the question that the U.S. media finds acceptable to ask.
Praised the Chinese Communist Party for lifting more people out of extreme poverty than any other country. You also have a track record of expressing sympathy for socialist governments in Cuba and in Nicaragua. Can Americans trust that a democratic socialist president will not give authoritarians a free pass?
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world.
And he has to respond, David. It's American exceptionalism. I guess maybe tell us a little bit about your book, Curing Exceptionalism, and how the media is completely complicit, and then Bernie Sanders feeds it of actually having to give a legitimate answer.
I don't know if you caught Joe Biden in that very same debate saying, I go and talk to the leader of China, and I call him a...
He called him a thug. He called the leader of China a thug. It's amazing how this goes to the American exceptionalism thing, right? I mean, ultimately, the way we talk about other leaders, and it's accepted as if it's perfectly okay to call the leader of another country a thug.
Well, it's not, I mean, maybe he is a thug. I'm not saying he is or he isn't, but Biden ends this rant with shouting, he's got to play by the rules. And the rules currently that the United States will fly its planes through your country whether you like it or not. I mean, it's a very different conception of the rules than an international standard of laws and agreements, adhered to by multiple countries. It's the rules laid down by the United States. And so when you see people in a room where the cheap seats were $1,700, upset because Bernie says something nice about Cuba, and not the least bit upset when Bloomberg says he's bought half the House of Representatives.
Everybody on stage. And, Sanders did make this strong argument of, we need to be honest that we've been toppling these governments, which gets to that point. Like you said, we're funding death squads in some of these countries in order to take the governments of these countries. And they're on stage yelling at Sanders for saying something about Cuba. I mean, that's utterly astonishing, this notion of we can do it, but if anybody else does it, you're off the table. I thought it was utterly astonishing.
It's not a question of disagreement on facts. It's a question of sort of religious taboos. I mean, nobody is questioning that Cuba has done good things on education and medicine. You're just forbidden to say it. Even if you preface it with all the bad things you have to say about Cuba, it doesn't matter. You're not supposed to say such things. It's sort of a taboo.
Another taboo was Sanders on Israel and Palestine. Essentially, a question was put to him. And, they hit him with questions like this because it's this notion of almost, are you Jewish enough? Because you don't necessarily, because you have a point of view where you look at Palestinians as actual human beings. Let's listen to this clip with Sanders.
This is Sanders responding now to CBS Major Garrett, asking Sanders about him calling AIPAC an organization that promotes bigotry, if Sanders would protect Israel, and if Sanders would move the U.S. embassy to Israel back to Tel Aviv. Here's his answer to that.
The answer is it's something that we would take into consideration. But here is the point. I am very proud of being Jewish. I actually lived in Israel for some months. But what I happen to believe is that right now, sadly, tragically, in Israel, through Bibi Netanyahu, you have a reactionary racist who is now running that country. And I happen to believe that what our foreign policy in the Mideast should be about is absolutely protecting the independence and security of Israel. But you cannot ignore the suffering of the Palestinian people. We have got to have a policy that reaches out to the Palestinians and the Americans. And in answer to your question, that will come within the context of bringing nations together in the Mideast.
Yeah, he's been pretty outspoken in comparison to the rest of the field when it's come to Israel and Palestine and talking about the specific humanitarian crisis there in Gaza. David, for me, this is an incredible watershed moment with AIPAC, and for Sanders to speak out against AIPAC like he has, and now to think that the Democratic presidential nominee here, if he gets through Super Tuesday with a huge lead, would not speak at AIPAC is an incredible moment over the last 8 years here in Washington, D.C., where you saw a huge shift to the left first to groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, and then a shift to, if not now, a younger Jewish American activist direct action group. To see this kind of spectruming happen, and then now 8 years on or so, to see now Bernie Sanders saying, no, I'm not only going to speak at AIPAC, I'm also going to speak out against this organization.
Yeah, 4 years ago, Roots Action, where I work, had a petition that Max Blumenthal posted asking Bernie to refuse to speak at AIPAC, and Bernie listened, and he did, although he told them he'd speak by video, and they didn't want that. Then we set up another petition this year asking the same thing, and Bernie and other groups, lots of people were pressuring him not to speak at AIPAC, and he agreed explicitly for the reasons that we had said. Don't dignify this place that gives a microphone to the and murderers. But Bernie, across the board on this issue and across foreign policy, is dramatically better. For all of his faults that we talked about earlier, he's dramatically better than 4 years ago. I wasn't promoting him 4 years ago, and I am now for that reason. And it's not just Bernie, but as you say, a cultural shift that hasn't reached maybe Mike Bloomberg yet, but even Mike Bloomberg in that debate last night sort of hinted that there might be some faults with certain settlements of Israel, where I've seen him in the past on television proclaiming that Israel can do absolutely no wrong. Its responses should be disproportionate, treating Palestinians as, sort of subhuman monsters. And so there may be even progress there, although they're all sort of still stuck on this two-state solution that there's no place left to solve. I mean, they're always kind of a decade or two behind. You look at Congress now has a bill to ban lynching, by the way, we advertise how swift and efficient they are. That the speed with which these people catch up is always, there's always a significant lag. But Bernie is the head of the curve among major U.S. politicians now.
Something else that happened at the debate, I don't know if you noticed, after he gave that speech, they applauded. I mean, this is an audience, this is the Bloomberg wine cave crowd that for the most part had to pay $2,000-$3,000 for tickets, who heard Sanders taking this extreme position, at the very least in the context of the Democratic Party, and they applaud. Like, I've never seen that. I know last year, or the last time around, I think there was a conversation between Hillary Clinton and Sanders, and that was the first time it really came up with this split in the party over this Israel-Palestine issue. And so, yeah, it has definitely changed.
Yeah, I think maybe the bashing of foreign leaders is just so acceptable that it even covers Israeli foreign. I remember a Republican primary debate several years back, also in South Carolina, where Ron Paul, the sort of libertarian anti-war candidate, was opposing war after war after war, and everybody was applauding in a Republican auditorium there in South Carolina. And then he said, maybe we should apply the golden rule to U.S. foreign policy, and they booed him.
It's the golden rule. Whoever has the gold gets to make the rules, I think, is the ultimate foreign policy lingo here in the United States. David, I am curious, thinking ahead again, if I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, what's fascinating to me is if Donald Trump can pull off some type of troop removal from Afghanistan or some type of peace deal, the ceasefire seemingly holding to some degree here, if Donald Trump is able to pull some troops out, say, look, I killed Qasem Soleimani, killed al-Baghdadi. It seems like he'll have a pretty strong foreign policy message to the American people. Obviously, he'll have to hide the purse to show people how much he's spending on all this stuff. But I mean, Barack Obama was spending trillions of dollars on our nuclear arsenal, so that didn't seem to bother too many Democrats. But it seems like Donald Trump is in a relatively good place around foreign policy issues, that for Democrats it's going to be hard to take a stance to his left or try to find a message that separates him a little bit.
Well, they could say we'll end the war on Yemen that we've tried to end, but you've threatened to veto. We'll pull the troops out of Iraq as Iraq has demanded, and you've vetoed. We will pull the troops out of the Philippines as the Philippines has demanded, and it's not clear you're going to follow through on. We will move hundreds of billions of dollars out of your military madness into human and environmental needs to work wonders we haven't even dared to dream about in these debates. We'll cut back this massive drone murder campaign that you took from Obama and escalated beyond belief. We'll close some of these bases you keep opening. We'll try to move that doomsday clock back away from the closest position it's ever been to midnight, where you've put it with your nuclear madness, and of course Obama's nuclear madness and George W. Bush's nuclear madness, and we'll engage with the world on the level of treaty agreements, on climate, on the rule of law, on the treatment of children and women and refugees. I mean, there is a message that could be made. Whether anyone makes it or not remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, there is a message there, indeed. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left here with you, David Swanson. You're there in Virginia. Virginia will head to the ballot boxes next Tuesday, along with 13 other states there on Super Tuesday. Just kind of curious your general thoughts, takeaways of what happens in Virginia. What should our listeners around the world know about the state, and where do you think it'll go there for the Democratic primary?
Yeah, it's a swing state, and it's a Super Tuesday state. It's one of the bigger, more valuable Super Tuesday states, but it still counts, and it's not winner-take-all, so you can get part of the state. Bernie's doing 3 big events, and they keep shifting arenas to enlarge them leading up to Super Tuesday. I think he has a very good chance of pulling off Virginia, as Barack Obama did. Barack Obama was the first presidential candidate in the history of Virginia to win the state who was not the more racist of the pair.
Let me ask you this. You've been around politics for a while. You've been watching this level of politics. And I tell my wife sometimes it is a momentous time to be alive because you are at an inflection point, potentially, in time. You know, we haven't seen this for 50, 60 years where a candidate has galvanized whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, like without an alienation under this banner of class, making it very clear that there's a class war going on. Just going back in 2008 and looking back to now, have you ever seen this much, it seemed like this kind of Overton window shift or this hegemonic shift in regards to the conversation within the context of the left?
No, what amazes me, and I did not predict and I cannot explain well, is the degree to which the corporate media cannot seem to stop Bernie Sanders. Because I have been around for decades watching the corporate media absolutely control public opinion on candidates and write candidates off as non-serious candidates at will. And the media seems to be absolutely incapable of that with Bernie, even backfiring, even helping him with its opposition. And if that proves true, and if that holds true for hundreds of millions of dollars of advertisements from Mr. Bloomberg, that will be remarkable news. If, on the other hand, Bloomberg's ads are more powerful than the media talking heads, and he buys the will of the country, that will be kind of negative news, I would say.
Do you think that would end the Democratic Party? My argument is that fundamentally ends the Democratic Party. If Sanders takes the pledge delegates and they rip it from him, I think for a generation, you're going to have, in the same way that the African-American vote went directly to the Democratic Party for a generation, I think the same thing would be true for the youth vote, going to essentially not Democrats for a generation.
What we may end up needing is masses of millions of people dedicated to democracy and to nonviolent action, and self-containing those who would smash windows in the streets of Milwaukee in July, because this may come down to the establishment Democrats stealing the primary from Bernie Sanders in a convention in Milwaukee. And if the public isn't able to stop that, yeah, you can forget the Democratic Party, and we don't have time to build another one.
Yeah, and that's what's really fascinating me. If Sanders is the nominee, of what happens to the Democratic Party if they're not going to just hand over the keys to a lot of people, and a lot of people like myself who are organizers who are so disillusioned with the Democratic Party. It's just to see a Bernie Sanders, somebody that's in my little universe of kind of politics, if he was elected, it doesn't mean I'm going to start organizing with Democrats here in Washington, D.C. And so where that friction and tension comes, how it plays out, is quite fascinating in a political, historical moment that you talk about. Jamarl, David Swanson, you are the director of World Beyond War. Your most recent book is Curing Exceptionalism. Tell us a little bit more about how people can find your work online.
Find me at davidswanson.org, and I also work, as you said, at worldbeyondwar.org and also at rootsaction.org.
That's David Swanson. You're listening to Political Misfits with Bob Schlehuber and Jamarl Thomas on Radio Sputnik live in Washington, D.C. We're going to be back after this talking about our revelations of the week and some UFOs. Stay with us. We'll be back after this.
Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed soundbites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with Bob Schlehuber. It is Hump Day Wednesday, and you know what that sound is. It is time to get mysterious, time to get a bit freaky. So, Revelation segment. And yes, like I said before, people told me when I talk about UFOs, I look like a younger man. So, this is going to be a massive, massive, massive revelation. Literal and real, literal terms, a UFO. Now, Jamal, where did you get this video from? I got this video from the NASA feed on the ISS, meaning the International Space Station. The International Space Station overlooks Earth, and you can go to the website, you can watch Earth in real time. It's an amazing thing. I like to say we are a ball hurling through space, and that is a thing that is infinitely true, at the very least in what we consider to be real. And as such, there are other planets out there, and in the same way that we have this notion of exploring other planets, it is infinitely likely that something else would also have that impetus to explore other planets. Now, what we call a UFO, or what people are trying to rebrand as UAPs, are basically something in our skies that we don't necessarily know what it is. That is either us or it is not. And both of those phenomena are mind-blowing. Last week, we did the report showing effectively the Popular Mechanics report, going through all of these things that the U.S. military was studying and things that they were learning using the programs, ATIP, for this particular government, using private enterprise in some cases to keep that information secret, but definitely having a lot more information and learning a lot more on these crafts with all of these pilots that are attesting to what they've been seeing than they have been letting on. So recently, a couple of days ago actually, the ISS catches for 22 minutes a craft. Now, you can go to the video yourself. I'll even put the link at the bottom. And it is a craft that for 22 minutes is in the feed of the ISS. As this takes place, at some point, the people in the ISS notice that there's a craft under them just going along at the exact same speed, almost in geosynchronous orbit. At some point, they start to zoom in on this particular craft. After a while, after the 22 minutes, the craft gets to the point where it starts to arc up and goes into space with a puff of green smoke. It was not ballistic. It was not just a rock. It was not just a drop of water or whatever they call it, swamp gas. It was a literal craft that you can see for yourself for 22 minutes that eventually leaves the frame. It was not ballistic. There was something under some level of momentum. Now, I watched that and I said, oh my God, that is the greatest thing ever. Now, this is, again, in context to all of the craft and all of the revelations that we have been seeing from the standpoint of the U.S. government and the information that's being released either in these videos or in the documents itself that have been released by the U.S. government or people who are investigating the government in this case. This is an amazing video. Now, the person who found this, Scott C. Waring, was watching NASA's live feed from the International Space Station and spotted something that appeared as a capsule, but when it didn't go into lower Earth orbit, it shot upward and into deep space. Waring said, I was watching NASA live space station cam when I noticed the camera zooming in on a strange object coming from below the station. At first, I thought it was a capsule or satellite, but its speed increased, and after 22 minutes, it shot up into deep space. That is literally what happened. Go and watch the video for yourself. You can see it for yourself if you want to see a real live UFO taken by NASA's own camera. Now, Bob is somewhat of a skeptic, at least a little bit more of a skeptic than I am. Now,
I'm in the process of learning.
I make the argument that it's either us or it's not. That argument is infinitely defensible because at this point, all of the media and information that has come out has shown all of this to be entirely and perfectly legit and credible. New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all of the stuff, credible. We know more than what we were letting on. And now you get a video like this where you can't call it swamp gas. You can't call it some just capsule floating in space. It's something that seems to have agency as it is moving through space and leaving the window of the view frame of the astronauts. And they themselves who saw it, who clearly were interested in it because they zoomed in on the object as it was moving. What do you think about this, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool video to watch. And one, shout out to NASA TV for all of the footage and live feeds they do offer there. Maybe yeah. So again, this video, it's fascinating to watch this. Like, it's like a cone.
Yeah,
it's kind of
like
shaped.
A tic-tac thing.
Looks like a.
It's almost like a triangular.
Yeah, triangular,
yeah.
Like a stealth bomber, but like completed on the other side. Yeah. I don't even know how to. Just go to our website, Political Misfits. Check it out on Progressive Soapbox. Tell me, maybe, have there been other incidences like this where we were caught some type of ship or UFO on camera, and then we found out later what it was?
Sometimes people see weird things in the cam, and they could like, okay, well, that's water, or that's something reflecting off of something else in order to give us this kind of impression. Like oftentimes they find ways to explain those things away. And so, but in this case, the difference is, there are plenty of things that they catch on the webcams. Sometimes they get, people have different distinctions about what those things are. Usually they aren't definitive because they are, it's like, yeah, maybe that's a piece of metal. Maybe that's a piece of this. The distinction with this is that it seemed to be literally flying on its own momentum with something coming out of the back, at the very least, like a puff of green stuff. Also, this is within the context of all of the reports that have been coming out for the UFO stuff. So think of it as in the other days, if they would have caught anything for this, oh, it's a UFO thing, there's a mental block on this notion of UFOs. Then you have all of these reports coming out in the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN. You have the report coming out in Popular Mechanics that goes through the history of the program that these guys were implementing for the U.S. government and the materials that they were holding in some of the companies. And then you look at this video and you're like, all right, here's a new context. The context is different. Meaning this stuff might have happened before, but the difference is it's coming within the context of everything else that's been going on from this particular subject. So my argument is very basic. It is either us or it's not. What those pilots were saying was either something that they hadn't seen before because they weren't privy to it, but it's ours, or that it's just not ours.
Yeah, and that's what's always fascinating to me. It's like if it's ours, I don't get how all of the people that would have to be involved in, and we kind of talked about it the other day about how you can break up the building of these ships to a bunch of different companies and only a few people that actually know that all of the things equal this kind of ship.
Exactly.
It just seems like to create what they created, this spaceship that we saw in this video, if that is us, it's a remarkable feat that somehow it was created, put up into space. And then if it's us, we spend and subsidize these projects at Virgin Atlantic, at SpaceX, and other people to build all of this technology that's clearly way behind whatever it is.
All of it is in the black.
If we do have what we saw on this video, why in the world are we spending just all of this money on these bros like Elon Musk making ships that aren't doing anything near what we are doing? Like, is that just cover to do our black ops stuff, to say, yeah, no, we're rooting them on, like, this is the future, but we actually have all this? I mean, the levels of conspiracy to hide it. For me, then I kind of lean more towards it's not us.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it would be so much.
It's so over the top. I mean, like, honestly, when I look at it and I'm like, it's either us or it's not, and I lean towards this thing that, look, we might have something up there where we look at it and be like, okay, that's pretty exotic. Because you can conceive this notion of hitting a certain level of physics where there's an inflection point. It's like if you're playing chess and you get to the level of, let's say, 2100 to 2200, you just play in a fundamentally different way. You look at the game differently. It could be the same way with technology. You are getting better and better at understanding of physics, and your technology is reaching a level where you can push the boundaries of that physics. And at some point, you learn something. Oh, we can do this, and it has this effect. And then you may be able to exploit that technologically in a way that somebody else who didn't know that looks at that and says, oh my God, that's something else. By the same token, I agree with you. There will be so much in the levels of secrecy and everything else that it would almost, like, for the U.S. to have a secret space program, like, that seems more elaborate than it just not being us, if that makes sense.
202-521-1320. You listen to Political Misfits Wednesday. It's our weekly segment on Revelations. A new video caught by NASA TV from the International Space Station catches a pretty remarkable UFO. We don't know what it is. Does anybody out there know what it is? There is a person here on YouTube that wrote, what is stopping NASA from just adding this type of spaceship into their feed? We also could see dinosaurs walking around, for that matter. How do we trust them?
All right, so there are a few things. So Judas Priest, I'm 17 minutes behind live. Love that I can do that. Hate missing anything on Political Misfits. Sorry you took the hit last. Oh, thank you, Judas Priest. Can we get more information on finding your podcast? Okay, we have a podcast. Bob will give
Spreaker,
that podcast.
iTunes, iHeartRadio. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you'll be able to find Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik.
Judas Priest, why does Bernie ever bring up medical insurance donors? We get attacked for plans. Guarantee Pete has taken money from pharma. Yes, we'll talk about that in a few. Good. Thank you, Susan. We appreciate it. Look, this, and Tulsi and Free Assange, the Susie W. Look, it's, if you are dealing with this notion of having to break through technology, say, for example, maybe Roswell, and you find out, hey, there's something else. And you, as the government, have a job of saying, how do we implement this stuff into the public without absolutely and entirely disrupting the public? And will it disrupt the public? Is the technology something that can be exploited where a weapon gets that much worse? Do we have interest in the standpoint of oil markets? What about all of these other tech markets? Like, how does this stuff play in our normal, typical society, even with this notion that there are things that we're always under threat, potentially? Like, it's a creepy way of dealing with it. Think of how we deal with threats. I mean, ultimately, a president could come up and say, that country is a bunch of maniacs, and he can draw up enough support where you can maybe attack another country. I mean, think of how belligerent we've been towards Iran, all under this guise of, we're going to be attacked, so it's okay with whatever we do. What does it look like when it's in the black? When you have no clue what it is? Meaning you don't necessarily, its technology is way beyond you by hundreds of years, and beyond that point, you don't necessarily know what it is. Like, anything that the government tells you at that point, you're stuck with because it's entirely of the black. Like, this gets a little bit dicey in regards to how you deal with the public on issues like this. And honestly, do you honestly trust that people who are your political leaders right now would deal with an issue of technology or deal with an issue of dealing with something else off this planet that's going to be in your best interest?
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, just the allocation now, talk about moving budgets from private to public here. Space Force is out. They're allocated $15 billion for 2021. That's compared to just $40 million in 2020. $10.3 billion for research and development. The new service will also get $2.6 billion for operations and maintenance and $2.4 billion for procurement. So it's interesting. I mean, is in a way Space Command, is Space Force, as ridiculous as it is, their uniforms, their logo, all of it, is it finally putting some of these kind of hidden cost into public reality, and you actually will have more of an understanding of what the United States is doing in space. So the ridiculousness of it when we have massive poverty and homeless people, but maybe in a way it actually is more transparent now.
Maybe. I mean, and you can ask even a secondary question: is Donald Trump pushing Space Force because he was watching Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson has been talking about UFOs? Like, we don't necessarily know all of the machinations that are going on behind the scenes. I mean, we do know people have been getting briefed. We do know senators and congressmen have been pushing to get more information from the military on what they know, when they knew it, even on this notion of some of the physics involved, like the quantum mechanics and some of these weird, strange physics that would need to be taking place for these guys to understand it. Also, you must understand the military has a contract with To the Stars Academy. Now, this is mind-blowing because To the Stars Academy's only issue is that they have materials dealing with UFOs. And so the notion that the military is working with these guys gets across that these guys are serious about it and that something, at the very least, is taking place. But it is a strange, strange phenomena. You're right that we have Space Force when we have also people living on the streets. And nobody finds any weirdness with that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at I was going to ask you real quick about what you thought so far about Star Trek Picard, and just laughing at the logo there of the A and the Picard they use. Almost, it's their logo from Star Trek, but it's the exact same logo that Space Force
stole the logo of Star
US
Trek.
Government stole from Star Trek.
It's
Picard
so horrendous.
Picard episode 6 is out tomorrow. Jamal, should people be watching the latest iteration of Star Trek here?
Picard, oh man, you're gonna get me on a rant. So Star Trek and Picard is one of the best episodes of Star Trek that's out there.
And I'm somebody that I watched Star Trek when I was really young, but I have no memory of it. I have watched the first 5 episodes, and I love it. It's really great. And so if you haven't watched Star Trek in the past, you can easily just jump in. You'll get caught up with the ideas
slide into
here.
it. But don't get me wrong, there will be certain emotional highs that you get if you've really, really been a big major fan in the past. Like, so one of the things that people sometimes argue with the show about, Picard in this is not a captain anymore. Yes, he's considered a great man. He's considered a captain and everything else, but he's a person. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of Star Trek that often didn't get explored is getting explored now, meaning what is Earth like beyond this organization of Star Trek? Because everything that you've seen in Star Trek over the episodes have been people in a militaristic, even though it's not military in the way that we're thinking about it, military just in this kind of hierarchical nature of exploring the galaxy, connecting, meeting new groups and races and so forth, creating a strong federation of planets. But you must understand that was part of an organization. What is Earth like? If you ask somebody what's Earth like, they're going to give you the best portrayal of it because, it's, again, an organization that deals with space and whatnot. It's a hierarchical structure. Picard, though, goes deeper than that because the question becomes, well, does Earth have any poverty? Well, clearly it does, but poverty not in the way that we think of it. Poverty only in the differential between a person and maybe somebody else. And so you saw that in Picard. You saw this notion of 7 of 9 killing somebody. Well, people were, they're aghast by this, but it's a darker world. And these people, again, are not a part of a federation. Picard, I've argued, would have lost the war with the Dominion as opposed to Cisco because he was too ideological. Ideology makes a poor substitute for reality. Your environment is going to push in regards to what you need to accomplish for any particular objective. But Picard was willing to go to the mat, giving up his career in order to protect an enemy of the Federation, believing that it is our ideological, philosophical objective of the Federation to reach out and do what we did, meaning protecting the Romulans, despite them being our enemies. Like, it's a fascinating show. It gets into this notion of the race relations, politics, especially in the standpoint of the Romulans, where you have this. Look, I don't want to go into the weeds on it. But it's a really good show that gets into the weeds in regards to politics, in regards to this notion of race, in regards to this notion of just kind of a darker exploration of the Federation. It's really, really good.
Well, on Friday at 1:30, we'll have our weekly segment. Every day at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a different weekly segment. That was Revelations. On Friday, we have a Come At Me Bro. Cine Concar here on our YouTube channel watching us says, Picard is so bad. There's your fight right there for Friday.
Don't do that, man.
Cine, if you're listening, call in Friday.
Call in Friday.
More willing to fight you.
Call in Friday. I'm getting energized just hearing that.
Well, let's take we got you ranting too much. Let's take a quick breather, Jamar. I'll give you we got to relax a little bit here before.
Hold me back.
We will be right back.
Hold me back, dog.
You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. A quick break before we come back with our final 10 minutes.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits. Live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik, we're bringing you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I am Bob Schlaber here with Jamarl Thomas. Jamarl, we had a lot of different conversations today talking about the impact of coronavirus, COVID-19 on the economy. We heard from Walter Smolarek live in London following the Julian Assange trial. We'll have more conversation on that over the rest of the week. And we're talking now about a few stories we wanted to fit in to make sure we didn't miss anything. 2 videos have now emerged and are trending on Twitter, Jamarl. One from Project Veritas, and the second one that's about 4 years old from our sister media, RT. Let me first tell you about this Project Veritas video, which they've now released, showing ABC News correspondent David Wright bashing the network for failing to report on President Trump accurately. The Daily Beast just put out a report on it with quotes from the video, and you can go to Project Veritas. I know, I can't believe I'm telling you to go to Project Veritas, but you can see the full video there. In the video, Wright, who's an ABC News correspondent, when asked if he thinks he's a democratic socialist, he goes, no, I'd probably just say I'm a socialist straight away. And then he goes on to lament that voters are poorly informed, and he alleges that ABC carefully crafts its reporting to fit a certain narrative, particularly around Trump. Wright goes on to say, I feel terrible about it. I feel that the truth suffers, the voters are poorly informed, and people also have the opportunity to tune in to whatever they want to hear. And so it's like there's no upside in, our bosses don't see any upside in doing the job that we're supposed to do, which is to speak truth to power and hold people accountable. He goes on to say, we are interested in the outrage of the day, the investigation, and the palace intrigue of who's backstabbing whom. Beyond that, we really don't cover the guy. Adding to say that the network is more focused on a profit and has turned into a promotion center, and promotion of the company and also promotion of individuals within the company, as opposed to the kind of dedication to story and a commitment to telling stories that we need to tell that are maybe hard to tell. The network isn't interested in voters, and it used to be better.
Let me be honest.
You should be honest.
Let's be honest.
Let's be honest. He was Mr. Wright on Project Veritas.
I accept the honesty of that. The job of a company is to make profit. I mean, this is a problem that TYT is getting into now, also dealing with this notion of profit. A job of a company is to make profit. Everything else is a stupid human trick. Whether they're serving hamburgers, whether they're building buildings. Yes, you build a building, but you build a building in order to make a profit from building that building. Also, if you're doing news, meaning this monetization of reality itself also serves the notion of a profit. So I understand, they're lamenting, oh, we want to do the big stories and everything else. But the big stories and everything else may not, meaning what's informative to the voter may not necessarily be the thing that's most profitable to the company. And all things being equal, again, at the end of the day, the point is to maximize your profit, even if you are a news agency. So I get the lament. There's always going to be this give and take within the context of, I want to do the best story to inform my viewers. And then the other news agency does a story that, for the most part, grabs those viewers because the story may be more flashy, more interesting, more clickbaity, and you want substance, you want meat and potatoes. It's always this kind of push and pull in regards to how do you inform while simultaneously also getting people to be interested. And yeah, from the standpoint of a news agency, their profit is going to be
and you know what?
paramount.
To all those people out there that trust the mainstream media and always tell us, oh, we guys take what you do here with a grain of salt and stuff. This is an ABC correspondent telling you right now that the network is failing people and is more willing to make money off of them than to educate them. What's the point of journalism? And we say this constantly, Jamar, and people don't believe it. They want to believe ABC. They want to believe CNN. They want to believe NBC. You have Van Jones calling the whole Russiagate a big nothing burger. And then he'll go on CNN and be like, I think we should look into this more. There might be more here. And people are like, oh my gosh, there's more here. And for me, it's always wild because I work in peace building. I try to make this world a less violent place.
You do, Bob.
And thank you. I try hard. And it's fascinating to me how when I talk to military people or to police, you'll talk to military people and they say, we don't want to go to war. This stuff's awful. We're the ones that have to leave our families. We're the ones that have to deal with casualties and lifelong injuries. You talk to police on a daily basis and people will say, the police will say, we can't arrest our way out of these problems. We know that the police aren't the solution to these issues. And then when you talk and see this guy at ABC News basically saying, look, mainstream media is there just to make money, not to educate you. But yet time and time again, you have people saying, nope, I'm watching mainstream media. I want more military, more wars, and I want more police. So even when the source itself is telling you that don't have more police, the police are saying that. Don't listen to us at ABC News because we're just trying to make money. We don't educate you. More and more people are still calling for more police, and they're going to be watching ABC News tonight as if they're going to try to be there to educate you.
If there could be one fundamental shift in the way that we think about our politics, just as human beings, well, and maybe two, it's to understand that billionaires and millionaires do not exist without you to allow them to be that way. Meaning, just a certain fundamental understanding of value of yourself in a society, and this realization that there are certain things as a rational society that we do for one another. That's notion of healthcare, that notion of education, those should be human rights, especially if you're talking about any notion of human development. Understanding and accepting that sort of value is not necessarily something that you're going to get from elsewhere. It is something almost like a hegemonic shift in the way that we look at ourselves in the context of the system. You are instrumental to building and keeping this place going. The lights don't come on without you. You should acknowledge that. And so the notion of somebody walking away with $1 billion when you are instrumental to that process just seems mind-blowing to me. On the second front, when we're talking about this particular election, the human beings that are involved with making this campaign work, that is essentially pushing this stuff forward, that is a movement. And that's a movement that I think, for the most part, has started to change the minds of the population in regards to what that society believes it is worth. And if nothing else, that is a massive shift in regards to consciousness. I mean, just think in 2008, we couldn't even get a public option. I mean, and that's you couldn't even get Obama to discuss it in those terms.
Yeah, pretty remarkable. Another remarkable video that's trending here is from 4 years old, but it's trending after John Cooper is the chairman of the Democratic Coalition and a former advisor there for Barack Obama. He tweets out a video from Ed Schultz, who has passed away, who used to be on RT, who was interviewing Jane Sanders, the wife of Bernie Sanders. And I guess his point is the Russians love the Sanders. I don't know what your point is here, but basically Jane Sanders was on RT to explain why open primaries like the South Carolina Democratic primary on Saturday are more democratic if they're open because anybody can come and say, I want to vote for this party with this party. And so I guess he's upset because Democrats think only Democrats can involve themselves in democratic politics, which is a fine argument. But the fact that they're putting this out and it's spreading pretty rapidly. 4 years ago, and Ed Schultz has passed away since.
But are
and
they
you
trying
put
to
this
trick
out.
people to thinking that she's on RT now, talking about the South Carolina primaries? Is that the reason why they're putting this video out?
I can't speak to their intent, but that's what all of us, we were like, oh, wait, Jane Sanders. I mean, the initial thing when you see something on the internet, you're like, oh, people put out stuff right away and people don't check bylines. So it makes sense that it was put out in a way to look like the Sanders are welcoming or going on Russian media all the time and they're big supporters. But you guys, Bernie, hey, I know you're listening right now because this is where you get your daily feed from Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin directly to you. Thank you for listening. You're welcome to come on our station anytime. Jane Sanders has already done Russian media in the past, so come on over, have a conversation with us. We'll only criticize your foreign policy a little bit.
You're better than the rest of them. Belligerently attack Vladimir Putin and saying, stay
Mr.
out of our
Putin,
elections.
I'm talking to you directly. This is a direct feed to Moscow here on Radio Sputnik. It's quite remarkable that story is trending. Just the last story for the day here. A court has ruled that Donald Trump can withhold money and grants from cities that have sanctuary policies.
Really?
And that's quite terrifying. Here in Washington, D.C., we're a quote-unquote sanctuary city. And even in sanctuary cities, it clearly has not led to that much protection for undocumented workers. And we've seen cases of ICE here removing undocumented people from D.C. jails. That is not what the law says it's supposed to do. That's not what a sanctuary city is. And so this latest court ruling will continue to be an attack on immigrants in this country. You are welcome here. You're welcome on Radio Sputnik anytime. Jamarl, thank you for joining me for another show here on Radio Sputnik. We are Political Misfits. Big thank you to David Swanson, Walter Smolarek, John Ross, and all of our callers today. We'll be back with another show tomorrow from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.